Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you watched the first video on the TW 200, you would know that we had an aftermarket carburetor on that bike. It was off Amazon. I didn't really understand why they didn't have the original one on there, so I asked them if they had it, if they could bring it to me, and they brought the OEM one, as you can see. Sorry about the train. But we're just going to go through this carburetor today and look for things that may have been causing the bog issue that they claim to have been having with this carburetor. In the last video, we had a no start issue with the bike when we got it, so we went through everything, adjusted the valves, all kinds of stuff. You can watch that video, but we found out that it had an aftermarket carburetor on it, and I wanted to get the OEM one back on there if there was nothing broken on it, so that we had the original carburetor. So what we're going to do today is, first, I just got this and I kind of want to look it over. I'll show you some of the things that I look at to just to make sure that it's okay, because we don't know anything about this carb. There's a few things you can learn when you first get the carburetor. One is, if you look at the slide, see how there's just a little gap underneath it? I like to look at that because that'll give you an indication of how far they had the idle adjusted. This one looks like it was pretty good. It's not adjusted too high, but sometimes when the pilot jet clogs on these, people that don't know how it works will turn the idle up thinking it needs a higher idle. Well, that's just raising this slide, and it's bypassing the pilot jet completely and starting to pull from the main jet, and that's why it'll stay idling when you turn it up, but it's never coming back down to your pilot circuit, and you'll have issues running it that way. Now that we know that the idle is set correctly, we know that somebody wasn't trying to quick fix it. Other things we can look at, we can see if the choke is in or out. It was in. You want to make sure that the choke is functioning as well. This one will be a plunger style. It looks like there's no butterfly that closes off, so this will be it'll be a plunger style. I'll take that out, check the plunger. I noticed there's a little bolt here with a seal on it, and what that would be is probably for a vacuum hookup, so you can pull a vacuum if you put a nipple in there and a hose on it. Some other things we can look at is at the screws in the bottom. You can look at them and see if they're a little boogered up from being taken out. It doesn't look like these are. That'll just give you an indication if somebody has already been in there. And then you can just check the throttle linkage here. Make sure that it works as it should. It's not hanging, sticking. The needle's in there. It looks like everything's good with the throttle. The next thing we can do is we can check the mixture screw here. It'll be on the underside, or sometimes just on different carburetors it could be right here, or it could be back here on two strokes. It's actually an air screw there. But anyways, this one's down here. Some of them can be D-shaped, some of them can be flat blade, some of them can have special splines on them. It just kind of depends on what you have. But what we want to do is put our screwdriver in there, and we want to count the turns in. There's half, one, about 1 1/4 is where this was at, and generally that would be pretty good depending on the altitude and stuff. It may need a little fine tuning at a idle mixture. What that means is we have that lightly seated now, so if we back that out, every time we unscrew that, it's a metering screw. I'll just take it out and show you. I'll show you what that looks like. It should have a spring, a washer, and an O-ring on it. Most of them do, unless it's like a cheap carburetor that they don't care if it has a little bit of an air leak, like the Amazon stuff. All right, have an O-ring, spring, O-ring on the big end, spring. And yes, there is a washer and an O-ring in there. A lot of times they get stuck. You can just take a pick and pull it out of there. But you can see down in that hole. But what I was trying to explain to you is this is just a metering screw here. So if you say your bike was lean at an idle, it was kind of popping and wouldn't idle real well, wouldn't take throttle real well. Since this is a fuel screw, you could turn it counterclockwise and it would back that screw out, and that lets a little more fuel through the passage at an idle. This only controls idle. make sure that you understand that that's all that this controls. If you have a problem at full throttle or something, that's going to be more your main jet or the needle. We'll go ahead and put this aside here because I'm going to have to take it out anyways. I'm going to get the O-ring and washer out. All right, so there was no washer and O-ring in there, which this one looks like it seals out here. So on this model, I guess it doesn't use one. I'll look it up and verify. We have the mixture screw out now. We could also go ahead and check the drain plug here on the bottom of the bowl. If you loosen this screw, that's the furthest down nozzle there, so that's going to be the drain for the float bowl. Next thing we can do is make sure our float bowl drain, which would be this screw right here, that's the lowest nozzle on the float bowl. So we can take that and make sure that it is snug or tight, just in case when you put it back on the bike, you don't want it, if it's left a little bit open or whatever, then when you put it back on the bike, obviously it's going to drain fuel out and you're going to think it's the float valve leaking, but it's not. Next thing we can do is go ahead and take these float bowl screws out, and usually I use a hand impact on these, but they're obviously not stuck in there. They're in good condition, so sometimes you get lucky and you don't have to use all those special tools. But we'll go ahead and take the float bowl off of here. Would be these 4 screws, and then it'll just pull off. All right, we've got the screws out. We'll carefully pull off our float bowl. Inspect the O-ring, make sure that it all came out on this side and it's not torn or damaged. We can reuse that. If you look down in the float bowl here, you'll see a bunch of varnish and stuff from fuel. It's also dirty. That I 100% believe that the jets are clogged up in this, and that was probably the issue the whole time, is it had a partially clogged jet, and that's why it was bogging, or it could need a little bit of tuning. We'll see. But we know that the float bowl is dirty here. Most people, they will clean this out, and they think that's what cleaning a carburetor is, but it's not. You do want to clean out the float bowl, but the main things you want to clean are these jets and the passages through the carburetor that they connect to, and I will explain why. And this is Archie. He's a little sleepy, but he likes to play, and the stick, he loves it for some reason. Looking at our float bowl here, we can stand the carburetor up. See all that stuff that just fell out there? Just corrosion, dirt stuff, I guess. Anyways, we can stand it up like this and make sure that the float opens, which it does. It should seal about right even with the surface there. That's going to be your float needle right here. This is something else that causes a lot of issues that people don't understand. But if your fuel comes in right here and it comes through this brass passage right here, if you look in there, there's a needle, and when the float moves up, it closes off that passage. That needle has a rubber tip and it seals a hole at the top, and that shuts off the fuel. So when the float bowl here fills up with fuel, the level's rising and it's slowly closing this. The fuel's rising, slowly closing the float until it doesn't need fuel anymore, and then it'll stop it. But as soon as it starts burning fuel or whatever, it needs more, it'll drop down and let more fuel in. Well, the issue with that is, one, these can get stuck open just for whatever reason, if it's dirty, or if there's a piece of dirt blocking the needle from closing, or if it's just a little dirty and the linkage here isn't functioning smoothly. But what happens is that will stay open, and then they'll put it on the machine, turn the fuel on, and that fuel, once it does that, once it keeps filling up, it only has one place to go, and that would be up through these passages. And the fuel level rises. If your carburetor is setting like this, where's the fuel going to go? It's going to go right into the intake, run down into your intake manifold, onto the valves. If your valves are open, it's just going to run fuel into the cylinder. That's going to wash past the rings, get into the crankcase. Your oil level will rise. That's what we were talking about in the first video on this. So that's some ways you can know if that's happening. Your bike will run like shit. It'll be super rich, Fallon plugs, if it runs at all. And the way you can check that is to pull your dipstick out and smell it and see if it smells like fuel. Then you'll know there's fuel contamination in there and the float valve's probably stuck. Or you can look and see if the level of the oil has rise considerably. Then you'll know there's oil. There's also gas getting into the oil, bringing that level up. The other issue that can happen with the floats is they can get stuck closing off, and then you'll have no fuel getting into the carburetor at all. Even though you have your petcock turned on and there's fuel going in, it's stopping right here and it's not getting to the parts that make the machine run. But how this is supposed to work is if you see this tower right here, this brass tower, it's not broken off. Sometimes they get broke off and that ruins the bowl of the carburetor. But why that is there is for when the float sticks open, that is a vent that fuel can run out of. And it would come on this machine out of this nozzle. Most times it's in the same nozzle as the drain. But in this one you can see it's right here and it comes out this nozzle. So you want to make sure that's clear. That way, meaning you can blow through it. This one it's clear. That way, if the float does stick like that, it can drain here and not all go down into your intake and into your oil and stuff. And that'll give you an indication, hey, why is that dripping? Well, because your float valve's leaking. That's the way it's designed. All right, now we're to this point, we can go ahead and remove the float and the float needle. We're gonna grab this pin right here. You have to be careful with these when you first initially give them a little knock over here, because a lot of times what happens is you'll actually put pressure on this ear right here and break it off. Then you have to buy another carburetor. So once you can, get it out with pliers. All right, I've removed that pin for the float valve. It just slides through here and then slides through the towers in the carburetor body, and that's what keeps it locked on. Sometimes they'll have a screw that holds them in. It just depends on the carburetor. Here is the float valve I was talking about. As you can see, it's a rubber tip needle. You want to make sure the bottom of it's not damaged or torn. Make sure it's still rubbery, not smashed. And this one's probably reusable. On the top here, there'll be a spring-loaded pin that pushes down, and all that does is expand that rubber a little bit to help it seal. So when the float smashes down, this presses on that, and that's what shuts it off. Need to make sure all that is good, which it is. The float needs cleaned up. And then, this is the float seat right here, this brass piece. You can take this Phillips screw out, that you can pull that out. That actually looks like it's damaged a little bit. If you look, something's hit it on this side. I don't know if you can see that on the camera or not. But right here, it's a little bit nicked and pushed in. I think it's okay still, but something did hit that. Somebody either took it out wrong or something. But let's go. We can just take that Phillips out and I'll show you the O-ring and everything I'm talking about. So if you had a rich condition that was not jetting, you could, the other thing that it could be, if it wasn't the float valve leaking over, it could be the O-ring on the back side of this seat leaking and letting fuel drip in here. All right, I'm looking at the float seat here, and I was telling you it looked a little dinged up. Actually, down inside of there, it is a little bit damaged too. Somebody's pulled it out with some pliers, meaning they've grabbed it like this and removed that before. And what they did is damage this because it's brass. Whenever you remove these, you want to get it out by doing this on the outside. Sometimes they're stuck so much that you can't get them out though, which is kind of the case with this one. I'm not able to get it like this, so I'm not even going to do this. I see that it's already damaged in there for somebody doing that before. We need to replace this seat. It may be sealing right now, but that's just asking for the float valve to get wedged in there or something. We need to replace that. It's damaged. So we know we'll replace that, so I'm just going to go ahead and destroy it. Actually, I'm not going to. I'm going to wait and make sure we can get that part. I'll leave that in there for now. But there's an O-ring on the back side that seals that when it's pressed in there. If that's torn, it could leak around the outside of that and not even come through the passage it's supposed to. Next, let's go ahead and get this baffle off of here. This is just a baffle for the fuel and the float roll. And then we'll take out the main jet here. The fuel gets pulled through this jet when you're at full throttle or wide open throttle. So if you're having issues in an open throttle situation, it's going to be this jet right here is partially clogged or too big or too small, or whatever your issue is. All right, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but I found the numbers and they're on the top side right here, and it says 114. So that is a 114 main jet. We want to know that for two reasons. This jet could have been, or this bike could have been jetted wrong, or it could need a bigger, this bike could need a smaller or bigger main jet. But we're not worried about that right now. We want to get it running with this carburetor first, and then we'll see if there's a jetting issue. We don't really know. But we can look at, most manufacturers will list the stock jet sizes and the jet sizes if you're in a higher or lower elevation, and we can compare that with this number that we have here to make sure we have the correct jet in it, besides having it on the bike running and jetting it that way. So we're going to put M for main jet, and it is a 114. Now we want to move on to taking the pilot jet out, and it's going to be a little Phillips screw down, or flathead screw down in this hole right here. The most center hole with the needle, that's your main jet. The pilot jet is in the hole next to it, the smaller hole that is offset from the center of the carburetor. You have to have a pretty small flat screwdriver to get into most of these, and you got to be very careful. This one already feels like it's not great. Sometimes it's better to turn them in just a little bit. This one, the jet wasn't even tight. Turn them in a little bit and then back them out just to get the threads into clean threads before you try and push it past the dirty ones. So we'll go ahead and take that out. I forgot to tell you, this is not a Mikuni or a Kian. I don't know what it is. This is past my date, but it's a carburetor. It's made in Japan, so it's good. It looks like it says TK or JK on it. I'm not sure. I never really pay attention to the names of carburetors. I know Kian and Mikuni, but other than that, I don't really give a shit. They're all the same pretty much. And I've got the pilot jet out, and what we're going to do is do the same thing. We're going to look through it. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. There we go, with light coming through it. Doesn't look clogged. Sometimes that can be deceiving though. Sometimes you can have fuel that varnishes or whatever and plugs that hole, and it'll be a clear color so you can still see through it, but nothing will go through it. So we're gonna blow both of these jets out. I like to spray contact cleaner directly into them and then blow them out with the air. If you can't get them that way, you can take one strand of wire, meaning you can cut an electrical wire, take one strand out of it, a small strand, stick down in there, and the wire is copper too, so it's not going to damage this unless you get crazy with it, but you can kind of poke out the dirt in there and get it to go through to clear out a really clogged pilot jet. So by what we're seeing so far, do we have any indicators of the bike bogging? Not really, but there are a few things that could cause it to bog. We mentioned the damaged float seat here. I wish I could, let me see if you guys can see that. I don't know if the camera will focus good enough to see the very little bit of damage around the lip of it. But the way that that could cause bogging is if it wasn't sealing and it's letting too much fuel in, like we talked about, and it was getting up into the intake through the jet passages, making it run rich. That could cause bogging. Or if it was getting wedged shut, wasn't allowing enough fuel in, that can make a lean condition bog, meaning not enough fuel. Now, here's the number one spot when people mess up when cleaning a carburetor, besides just cleaning the bowl and saying that's the clean carburetor. After you do the jets, what's the only thing left that could cause the bike to not be getting the proper amount of fuel after it's made it through the jets and the carburetor? It is the passages that the fuel goes through inside the carburetor body to get into the intake. And the only way to test that would be to stick a nozzle of brake cleaner in there. And actually, I'll just grab one and show you. You can generally see where the passages go. I know where they go because I'm so used to working on these things, but you can see where the passages go within the carburetor and know where it should come out of. The main jet it sprays straight up in, so it's just going to spray right up into here, right under that throttle. Also, I wanted to mention real quick, when you take the main jet out, if the emulsion tube comes with it, you want to verify that this piece right here comes out, because a lot of times there are two pieces in some machines. This one is one piece, and what that is, the needle from the top of the throttle cylinder slides through that to meter the fuel in between the pilot jet and the main jet. This is your mixture screw is going to control fuel in idle, or your fuel mixture in idle. Your pilot jet is going to control idle and just off of idle. It kind of combines with the mixture screw, and I'll show you how in a second. The main jet, or the needle, we'll go to the needle first. That is going to be kind of in between the spot that the pilot jet doesn't cover and then the main jet at wide open throttle. So when your throttle's open, it pulls that needle up, which rises in this tube, and that kind of meters, just like the mixture screw jet, it kind of meters the fuel in that time, how much can get up in there. But your main jet size is going to be wide open throttle, meaning that needle is completely pulled up out of this emulsion tube, and that's allowing as much fuel as possible, as big as this hole is right here. That's why your main jet is only wide open throttle. Anything lower than that is going to be either be the needle, the pilot jet, or the mixture screw, or something else like an air leak. So the fuel is going to get pulled in right here through the pilot jet, and the hole on that pilot jet, as big as it is the max amount of fuel that will ever be pulled through there. The mixture screw is what controls how much of that gets used. So if you have a lean idle issue and you have a pilot jet that is big enough to be, for that machine, then when you back that mixture screw out, you're allowing more fuel, or more of the max amount of fuel that can be pulled from that pilot screw into the intake to richen up your mixture. Now, if you have to go any more than 3 turns out on the mixture screw to achieve that, what does that mean? That means that your pilot is too small. You need a bigger pilot. And the reason for that is you're letting the max amount of fuel that can be pulled through this pilot jet through, but the machine is still lean. That means that you need a bigger pilot jet to make up the difference from that, and then you can go back to 1 turn or 1 1/4 turns out on your mixture screw. And it works the same on the pilot jet for it if the pilot jet was too rich. If you run the mixture screw all the way in and shut off all the fuel through the mixture screw and your machine still runs, that means that your pilot jet is too big, or it's getting fuel from somewhere else through the carburetor to run off of. I'm gonna go ahead and blow through these vacuum lines just to Okay, this one right here is completely clogged. You can probably see down in there. They usually clog right here, and that's where it's where they either get pinched in the frame, where they rutted down through, usually the swing arm, it'll push right here just a little bit. Let's shoot some fuel through the pilot jet here, and you should see it come out, like I said, right here, and then there's one more spot. See it come out right there. Now, if you look inside of here, where the mixture screw comes in, there will be a little hole, and that's where that needle seals up against. Let me see if I can find it. It's very small, but I can see it. You probably won't be able to on this camera, but it is right here, very tiny. It comes up through. That's where that needle seals. You should also spray fluid through this, right where it would come out right there. See it? I'm trying not to cover my cam, but it is coming through there. That means that your pilot circuit is completely clean, and there's no reason this machine should not idle unless there's an air leak or something. You know your carburetor's clean, pilot jet's clean, main jet's clean. What else can we go through? There's a bunch of other passages that you should also make sure are clean. Go ahead and take this throttle cap off here. I will say that one of the screws was loose on that. Here, when you pull on the throttle cable, it lifts that arm, pulls the slide up, and pulls the needle up as well, allowing fuel up through the jets, and then allowing air in from the air box, and it does that by raising that slide. So when your bike's idling, it's setting like this, pulling a very small amount of air through, and then fuel's coming through your mixture screw and pilot jet into the intake in that hole we were talking about. That mixes together and provides an idle. When you open the throttle, that slide raises, pulling more air, creating more vacuum, pulling more fuel, and it switches over to this needle jet now because it's raised up and allows the more fuel that's needed to mix with the more air. And then when you go to wide open throttle, you have the max amount of air coming through this bore as possible, and that draws more fuel up, meaning the needle's completely open out of that emulsion tube, out of the main jet, so you're getting the max fuel through that main jet, and that's when your machine's going to run wide open, the highest RPM. If you're having problems at a high RPM or at wide open, it's going to be in that right there. Also, you want to check the pilot jet on this one. A lot of times it can be on the top, just like the main. On this one, it's right here on the side, and you're not going to be able to read on the camera, but it says 40. It's punched into the side. So that is a size 40 pilot jet and a 114 main. So we know that. We can go ahead and write for the pilot or the slow jet is going to be a 40. And we can compare that to what should be in it. If that matches what should be in it, you still may need to fine tune. If you have a different exhaust on, different air filter, air intake, something like that, you may need to fine tune it depending on your altitude, the weather, all those things. So at least now we have a starting point. We know what should be in it, and we'll be able to adjust to what we need when we get it on the bike, get it running, see if it's running correctly. I see no reasons for bogs on the carburetor unless this could be leaking air, and we'll find that out when we put it back on the bike. There could also be, if these boots are not sealed correctly, or if it pops out of the boot, you're going to be leaking air, and you're going to have a lean mixture, could be causing a bog. Also the intake manifold, there's a gasket on the back side. Could be leaking air there, and I think it was. We'll take that off and check it as well. I do want to pull the choke out as the last thing. Usually I take carburetors completely down, meaning everything out of them. But this one's actually in pretty good shape, besides the things that, like the float seat and everything that I told you I needed to order, and I need to clean everything out real good. But I'm not worried about taking all the throttle linkage off of this one. I am going to remove the choke and make sure that it is working the way it should, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. All right, we've got a 12 millimeter wrench. We're going to come in and we're going to take this whole assembly off here, and we're going to pull it out. It should be a plunger. Make sure that this tip is on there and not broken off. It's a little dirty. It could be cleaned up before we put it back in, just to make it not stick. Sometimes these stick, and then you have to drill them out and stuff, and that's no good for anybody involved. But let's talk about how the choke works. So you have this passage here. You can see there's a hole down in the bottom. Fuel comes through that hole on your slow circuit. It comes from here up to there. So when you have the choke off, it'll be like this, and that needle will be pushing into that hole, stopping the fuel, because you do not need the extra fuel. When you turn the choke on, you pull this plunger out. This plunger comes up and the needle comes out of the hole, and that gives you the extra fuel bypass through to start the machine. Now, obviously, if you have to leave your choke on for the machine to run, how many times you hear people say that, oh, it only runs with the choke on, you have to leave your choke on. Well, you need to fix the carburetor, because what that means is that your pilot jet is clogged and your machine can't get any fuel through here, and the only way to get it to run is to bypass all that by pulling the choke, and it comes through, and it basically bypasses the slow circuit, the idle circuit completely, letting fuel in that would normally be coming in through your pilot circuit instead of the extra starting. So you are getting fuel, but what problem does that have? Well, when you go to running the machine past an idle, you're getting this extra fuel bypass through here, plus the fuel coming through your main jet and the needle into there. So it's going to run rich because you're leaving the choke on. And that can cause engine damage. So if you ever have that issue where it'll run with the choke on idle, as soon as you shut it off, it dies, that's because it's not getting fuel through here. You need to do what we just did and clean the slow jet, the mixture screw, and all the passages through. Another issue that is usually on vacuum style carbs that have a vacuum style slide here. What happens with them is the needle is adjustable, and this needle right here, meaning you can raise it or lower it, and that allows more fuel. And at certain periods of throttle, sometimes you got to fine tune them that way. And what happens is, if this needle is not, it slides down through the top of the slide, and there's a clip on the back side. If it's all not situated properly, and there's a spring that pushes down on top of it on those style carbs. And if you can push on this needle, just barely move it, and it'll go up and down at all, that's going to cause a rich issue, because that's what controls the fuel at that point in throttle. If it's able to move up and down freely a little bit, that's going to be allowing too much fuel in. So you got to watch that. Sometimes that can throw some weird rich running situations that are hard to diagnose. But just check that when you take the carb apart. Make sure that needle is nicely seated, and it's not just free wobbling in there pretty much. So we didn't really find any issues as far as what would be causing the bog. No clear issues besides this float needle seat here that we're going to replace. So I think this carburetor was fine. We need to clean it real good, get all the dirt out of it, clean all that up, clean the jets out, blow through all the passages with compressed air, clean all this up. We'll just go through the whole thing, which I'm going to do. I'm not going to bore you with that. Clean these floats up too, and get a new seat in there just to make sure that everything is good.